So the question, you can go through it in different ways, right? You've got Tom used 3 bottles of syrup to make some desserts. Each bottle contained 1.5 liters of syrup. The cost of 1 liter of syrup was £5. Find the total cost of syrup he used. So I can do this, right? First method I'm going to show you here. Method 1. Method 1 is, I know I've got 3 bottles. So I've got a bottle here, let's say a bottle there, and a bottle there. I'm going to use my bars to represent my bottles. I know each bottle is going to have 1.5 liters. 1.5 liters, 1.5 liters of syrup, 1.5 liters of syrup. Perfect. First question is, how do I work out how much syrup I have altogether, right? How much syrup have I used in all 3 of these bottles? Well, I know I've got one whole one here, another hole, another hole. That's 3 holes. And I've got a half and a half. That makes another hole. That's 4 holes and another half here. So I know all together I've got 4.5 liters. So method 1, I'm working out how many liters of syrup I'm using in this in these desserts, right? I've just worked out I'm using 4.5 liters of syrup. The question then goes on to say that each 1 liter costs £5. I've got 4.5 liters. So I need to work this out. 4.5 times £5, because each liter costs £5. So I can use my understanding of fractions, which we've been going through this lesson, and I can make this a bit easier on myself by thinking about 4.5 as a improper fraction. Or if I'm confident, I can also think of it as, well, if this is 4.5, I can do 4.5 like this. I know what 4 times £5 is. That's easy. That's £20, right? I know 4 times £5 is £20. And I know half times £5, which means half of £5, is £2.50. And so altogether, 4.5 times £5 must be £22.50p, right? £22.50 is the total cost of those 3 bottles, right, of syrup, which costs £5 per litre. That's one way. Look what I did, guys. What I did was I worked out the total amount of syrup I'm using, which is all of that. That's the total amount. And then after working that out, I know each 1 litre is £5. So I calculated how much it would cost for 4.5 litres, which was £22.50. And the way I did that, I split my 4.5 like this. And then I worked out 4.5 times 5 is £22.50. I could also, instead of doing 4.5 times 5 in that way, I could do 4.5 is equal to 4 times 2 is 8, plus 1 is 9 halves. And so 4.5 times £5 is the same as multiplying 9 halves by £5. And that 5 is 5 over 1. So I could do it this way. 9 times 5 is 45. 2 times 1 is 2. 45 over 2. 45 over 2 is 22 and a half, right? And because this is in pounds, it's 22.5 pounds, which we write down as £22.50p. So that's method 1, right? Even though we've got 2 different ways we can multiply 4.5 by 5, it's still my method 1. My method 2 is going to be slightly different, okay? So method 2 is going to look like this. Instead of multiplying or adding all of the syrups together, I know, if I go back a step, I know all of this. Let me copy all of this. I know, if I can copy it, there we are. If I copy this and I put it here, I know all of that is 4.5 now, but let's pretend I don't know, okay? Let's pretend I don't know. I know that this is 1.5 liters. I know this is 1.5 liters and this is 1.5 liters. I'm just going to concentrate on one of these bars. I'm going to concentrate in one of these bottles only. I know I've got 1.5 liters in there, so I can work out that 1.5 liters times £5 is how much it's going to cost. So let's do that. 1.5 times 5. Well, 1 times 5 is 5. Half of 5 is £2.50. So 1.5 times 5 is £7.50, right? 1.5 times 5 means 1.5 of £5. One whole £5 is £5. Half of £5 is £2.50. So 1.5 £5 is £7.50. Or I could think of this as 3 over 2. 1.5 is 3 over 2 times 5. 5 is 5 over 1. And I can multiply. 3 times 5 is 15. 2 times 1 is 2. 15 over 2 is 7.5, which again is £7.50. So now I've worked out each one of these bottles must cost me £7.50. And therefore, all 3 bottles must be £7.50 times 3, which again, altogether, £7.50 times 3 is £22.50, like we've got in our first example, first method, right? £22.50 here as well, £22.50 here, £22.50 here. No different, because we expect the same answer because it's the same question, right? So that's how we can solve this question by using 2 different methods.